Hello and welcome to series of lectures on diuretics. So what will be our plan of discussion? First, I will be discussing about renal physiology. Then I will be defining diuretics along with its classification. There are different ways to classify diuretics and we will be seeing them. Then I will be taking individual groups along with important agents pertaining to that particular group. And lastly, I will be discussing antidiuretics, that is the opposite of diuretics. So let us start with the renal physiology. So what is the function of kidneys? This is what is this diagram? This shows then it is a structure of nephron. Okay, and there are different parts of nephron, and we can see that the GFR we know is 120 mils per minute. So GFR, that is the glomerular filtration rate, is 120 mils per minute, while we can see the output from this nephron is only 1 milliliter per minute. So what is happening to the filtrate, to the ultrafiltrate? As 99% of the filtrate is getting reabsorbed, so only 1 milliliter per minute of the filtrate is getting out of the kidneys. So the rate of urine formation is only 1 milliliter per minute, while GFR is 120 milliliter per minute. So most of the fluid is getting reabsorbed. And for that reabsorption purpose, we have different transporters that are embedded in this nephron, in different sites of nephron. So talking about the sites, let us see what are those sites. So we can see here, first is proximal convoluted tubule. When the this filtrate, then when there is a passage of ultrafiltrate through different parts of nephron, first it is passed through proximal convoluted tubule, and here we can see different transporters. Again, there are some transporters for acidic substances, and also there are some different transporters for basic substances which are getting actively secreted into the lumen. Okay, and we can also see here that most of the bicarbonate, around 95%, is getting reabsorbed in the PCT itself, and 60% of sodium is getting reabsorbed from the proximal convoluted tubule. Remember one thing, to conserve water there is a need for the reabsorption of sodium, as we know that wherever sodium moves, water moves along with it. Okay, so there will be a reabsorption of sodium at different sites of nephron, so that the body or the nephron is able to conserve the water. So here 60% of sodium in PCT is getting reabsorbed, and as we move further, as we dip into the medulla, this is the medullary section, and as we dip into the medulla, we will encounter parts of loop of Henle. We can see whole loop of Henle is present in the medulla. So first part is thin descending loop of Henle. So what is the role of this thin descending loop of Henle? That it is permeable only to water. It is impermeable to solutes. Okay, or salts. So we can see as the ultrafiltrate passes through this portion, it will become more hypertonic. The tonicity will increase. It will become more concentrated. So at the tip of medulla, we can see maximally concentrated this fluid is present. Okay, and as we move further, then we are crossing this thick ascending loop of Henle. Again, this is important here, that thick ascending loop of Henle is impermeable to water. Water will not get reabsorbed from this part. So the content of this thick ascending loop of Henle will become hypertonic or hypotonic. It will become more hypotonic. It is a diluting segment. As we can see, there are different transporters for electrolytes, like that transporter, the name of the transporter is sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter. Sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter is present in thick ascending loop of Henle, the importance of which we will see when we will be discussing loop diuretics. Okay, so just for now, that around 25% of sodium is getting reabsorbed in thick ascending loop of Henle. As we move further, we will encounter distal convoluted tubule. Here we can see again one transporter. The name of that transporter is sodium chloride symport. Again, sodium chloride symporter, and we can see here only 10% of sodium is getting reabsorbed here. And we can also see in this portion only there is parathyroid hormone dependent reabsorption of calcium. Okay, and again if we move further, we can see at the late DCT, or yeah, at the late DCT we can see, or at the early collecting duct we can see that the role of aldosterone will act here. And again the sodium concentration, or sodium amount which can be reabsorbed here is only 5%. So aldosterone causes reabsorption of sodium, that is only 5%. Okay, and again if we move further in collecting duct, we can see actually this collecting duct here, it is also impermeable to water, but under the influence of ADH there is incorporation of some aquaporine channels through which water is reabsorbed. So only under the influence of ADH water is reabsorbed in collecting duct. And it is said that the action of ADH, this is important, it is said that the action of ADH is dependent upon this portion. Okay, is dependent upon the intactness of sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter. The more dilute they form this fluid in the thick ascending loop, the better action of ADH will be there. So if these transporters are not acting efficiently, ADH will not able to conserve the water. What is the function of ADH? That is antidiuretic hormone, is to conserve the water. So final conservation of water is at this site, and it is mediated by ADH. This is important. And also in this diagram we can make out different actions, a different site of actions of diuretics. So before going into that, let us define what is a diuretic. Basically, diuretic is a substance or a drug that causes increased production of urine, with sodium chloride excretion. So if we use diuretics, there will be increased production of urine, along with that there will be increased excretion of salts. So this is the definition of a diuretic, and we have different types of diuretics and whose site of actions are. See, one of the agent that can block the enzyme which is present in the PCT. The name of that enzyme is carbonic anhydrase, and carbonic anhydrase enzyme is responsible for the reabsorption of bicarbonate. So those are called as carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, and they will act in the proximal convoluted tubule. We have other group of agents that will block this important transporter, that is sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter, which is present in thick ascending loop of Henle, and this is blocked by loop diuretics. As they are present in loop, so they are also called as loop diuretics. They are the class of agents called as loop diuretics, and they will block the sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter, which is present in thick ascending loop of Henle. We have another group of agents that will block the symport of sodium chloride, that is sodium chloride symporter, that is present in early part of the distal convoluted tubule, and those are called as thiazide group of diuretics. Thiazide. Okay, and here again we have different agents those are called as potassium sparing diuretics. They will act in the collecting duct, and they are of two types. The one is potassium sparing diuretics and another one is aldosterone receptor blockers. Aldosterone receptor blockers and potassium sparing diuretics. They are collectively called as potassium sparing diuretics. So okay, so they will be acting in collecting duct. Also, one group of agent that will act throughout this the different parts of nephron is osmotic diuretics. So they are group of agents that will be acting throughout this nephron, and they will increase the formation of urine. So let us discuss now about the classification based on the efficacy. Right? Just now we discussed the classification based on the site of action of diuretics. Now we will be discussing about the classification based on the efficacy. So in based on the efficacy, we have three different types, that is high efficacy diuretics. In this only one group of drug is there, that is loop diuretics, and again here we have three or four different agents like furosemide, torsemide, bumetanide and ethacrenic acid. The most important drug which is used here is furosemide. We have again moderate efficacy diuretics. Those are thiazides and thiazide-like diuretics. In thiazides, we have chlorothiazide, hydrochlorothiazide, and in thiazide-like, we have chlorthalidone, metolazone, and indapamide. Here, hydrochlorothiazide is more commonly used. And lastly, we have low efficacy diuretics, which is again of three types. One is carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Their name ends with zolamides like acetazolamide, dorzolamide, brinzolamide. So they will be ending with zolamides. So prototype is acetazolamide. And in low efficacy only one group is osmotic diuretics. Here we have three agents. Those are mannitol, urea and glycerin. Mannitol is more commonly used. And lastly, we have potassium sparing diuretics. Again, it is of two types. One is aldosterone receptor blocker, and another group is that will block the sodium channels that are present in epithelium, that is epithelial sodium channel blockers. In aldosterone antagonist, we have spironolactone and eplerenone, while in epithelial sodium channel blockers, we have triamterene and amiloride. So basically this classification, that is based on efficacy, is again based on the ability of a drug to excrete out the sodium. Suppose this high efficacy diuretic is excreting around 25%, is causing the excretion of sodium of about 25%, while this moderate efficacy diuretic causes excretion of sodium, urinary excretion of sodium of 10 to 15%, while in case of low efficacy diuretics the urinary sodium excretion is less than 5%. So I have told you, if we increase the excretion of sodium, there will be more diuretic effect. So based on this, we can divide the diuretics into three different categories: high efficacy, moderate efficacy and low efficacy. So after the classification, let us see again revise this thick ascending loop, the electrolyte movement in thick ascending loop of Henle. So let us orient ourselves first to this diagram. On one hand side we have luminal side, this is called as luminal side, and on this side we have basolateral side. Luminal side will contain urine, while basolateral side will contain blood. So the substances absorbed from here will go into the systemic circulation, and the substances which are not getting absorbed from here will get excreted out. Basolateral side is also called as interstitial side. This is important. So basolateral side, interstitial side will contain blood, and luminal side will contain urine. So in thick ascending loop of Henle, I have already told you there is one important symporter. The name of that symporter is sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter. Symporter means all this ions transported by this symporter will go in one direction. So we can see here this sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter is helping in the reabsorption of sodium, potassium and chloride ions. In what happens in thick ascending loop of Henle is that when this transporter acts, the intracellular, the luminal concentration, that is the luminal concentration of the potassium ion increases. And here in thick ascending loop of Henle, there are some leak channels through which potassium will get leaked out. Okay, so in this membrane, potassium will form a positive potential due to this leaking out of this potassium ions. There will be formation of this positive potential, and what it will do, it will help in the creation of a force that will drive out the absorption of two ions, that is calcium and magnesium. So this is important, that thick ascending loop of Henle, here there is one transporter, that is sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter, by whose action, due to whose action there will be formation of a positive potential in the luminal membrane that drives out the reabsorption of calcium and magnesium. And this reabsorption is through paracellular transport. Between the cells there is paracellular transport through which calcium and magnesium are retained in thick ascending loop of Henle. So this transport is important for the reabsorption of calcium and magnesium. So let us proceed with the drugs acting in loop, that is thick ascending loop, and only one class of drug, that is loop diuretics, are important here. See, loop diuretics are secreted into the proximal tubule. Actually, they are highly plasma protein bound, so they are not filtered through the glomerulus. So how they will get to their site of action? There are transporters which are present in the proximal convoluted tubule. There, through that transporter, I showed you there that there are transporters for acidic substances and basic substances, and loop diuretics are weakly acidic drugs. So they will use that acidic transporter called as organic anionic transporter, which is present in proximal tubule, and through this transporter they will get secreted into the proximal tubule. And from proximal tubule, through traversing that loop of Henle, they will reach their site of action, that is thick ascending loop, and obviously they will stay in the luminal side, and that transporter which is present in that site only, that is luminal sites, the name of the transporter is sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter, is inhibited by these agents. Okay, so if that transporter is inhibited, obviously there won't be any reabsorption of sodium, that is 25%, up to 25% of sodium will not get reabsorbed, will get excreted out from the kidneys. That will lead to its diuretic action. And also there won't be any formation of positive potential for which was created by the potassium due to back diffusion of potassium. So the reabsorption of calcium and magnesium will not take place. That is, there can be hypocalcemia and hypomagnesemia due to the use of loop diuretics. And also it is said that loop diuretics are also weak carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Their main action is in that thick ascending loop of Henle. They will inhibit this transporter sodium potassium 2 chloride, while they also have some effect on the enzyme, that is carbonic anhydrase, which is present in PCT, that will cause increased excretion of bicarbonate and phosphate. So it will cause bicarbonate urea, again leading to or increasing its or potentiating its diuretic effect. So loop diuretics, these two mechanisms are important. And also we have seen that for ADH, for antidiuretic hormone to act efficiently, there was the need of corticomedullary gradient, which was established by thick ascending loop of Henle through the use of this transporter, sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter. As this transporter is being blocked here, and so this will lead to decreased effect of antidiuretic hormone in the distal tubule. Okay, so what is that? That this this decreased effect of ADH will also add in the diuretic effect of loop diuretics. So these are some of the mechanisms, all complicated, but most important one is that it will inhibit the sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter in thick ascending loop of Henle. So where we can use this, we will again come back to this mechanism of action in next diagram. So let us first see the uses. What are the clinical uses of loop diuretics? They are also called as high ceiling diuretics. Why high ceiling? Because one of the important factor I told you that they can cause excretion of sodium, renal excretion of sodium of about 25%. So high ceiling diuretics. So among this, which one is your loop diuretics? If ABC, these are the dose response curve of three different drugs. So this is loop diuretic because they have high ceiling. See, ceiling dose is a dose at which there is maximum effect, and if we increase the dose further, there won't be any effect. So the ceiling dose of this diuretic is high as compared to others. So it has a high ceiling. Okay, as we increase the dose, the effect, that is diuretic effect, also increases with loop diuretics. And also this loop diuretics have steep dose response curve. It has steep dose response curve. So that is why it is called as high ceiling diuretic. So what is the number one indication? It is more commonly used in the symptomatic management of pulmonary edema, acute pulmonary edema. So by its diuretic action, we will see how in detail that how loop diuretics are helpful in the treatment of acute pulmonary edema. Basically, because of this high ceiling diuretic, it is the drug of choice in acute pulmonary edema. And in heart failure, again there is volume overload, there is edema, there are congestive symptoms which are symptomatically managed by loop diuretics. In hypertension also we can use loop diuretics, although they are not preferred. In fact, in case of only in case of refractory hypertension, which is not responding to other forms of antihypertensive agents, then only we will be using loop diuretics in hypertension. And also if the patient is suffering from renal dysfunction, if there is severe renal failure, then we can use loop diuretics, renal failure along with hypertension. And also in any type of edemas, in refractory edemas, we can use loop diuretics, except the edema due to cirrhosis. There we will be using potassium sparing diuretics more. Okay, we will see that. And also for causing forced diuresis, in what happens in some anion overdose, or like in this bromide overdose or iodide overdose, there we can increase the excretion of, we can flush out these anions by using loop diuretics. So again, for causing forced diuresis, we can use loop diuretics. And lastly, this is a non-diuretic use, that is in hypercalcemia we can use loop diuretics. Why? Because we know that loop diuretics decreases the reabsorption of calcium, that is, it increases the excretion of calcium. So symptomatically we can reduce the levels of calcium and we can prevent the development of kidney if we use these agents in hypercalcemia. But whenever we are using loop diuretics in hypercalcemia, we have to give loop diuretics along with IV fluids, that is saline, normal saline. Why? Because if this loop diuretics are given alone in hypercalcemia, there will be contraction of the ECF. Okay, extracellular fluid contraction will be there. That will lead to increased reabsorption of calcium in the kidneys. So that can aggravate the problem. So to counteract that, to prevent that dehydration, we have to give IV fluids along with loop diuretics in hypercalcemic states. One important feature of loop diuretic is that it can be used in severe renal failure. Okay, it is active even if there is renal failure, but not if there is anuria. If there is total loss of urine production, obviously this loop diuretic will not be able to go to its site of action, will not be able to produce its diuretic effect. So in case of anuria, you cannot use any of the diuretics, but in case of renal failure, not anuria, there you can use loop diuretics. Why? Because it is said that loop diuretics causes increased prostaglandin synthesis. How? Because it causes increased expression of cyclooxygenase enzyme, and that is involved in prostaglandin E2 synthesis. And prostaglandin E2, due to this prostaglandin synthesis, there will be increased renal blood flow. So that can have some renoprotective role. So due to which loop diuretics can be used in renal failure also, but not in anuria. So now see the mechanism of action of loop diuretics. So which transporter will be inhibited by this? So this sodium potassium 2 chloride symporter will be inhibited by loop diuretic, and that will cause increased excretion of sodium, and also there will be excretion of calcium and magnesium. Also potassium will be excreted out, leading to hypokalemia also. Okay, and hypomagnesemia and hypocalcemia. So in certain conditions we have to use furosemide in very high dose. We have to use furosemide in very high dose. In fact, it is said that up to 1000 milligram can be used in these conditions. Why? In case of nephrotic syndrome or renal failure, we have to use very high dose of furosemide, because in these conditions, as there is a damage to the kidneys, due to which there will be filtration of albumin into the filtrate. So albumin will be present in the tubular fluid, and we know that loop diuretics are highly bound to the plasma proteins. So furosemide will bind to this albumin, and it will form a complex which will get secreted out, which will get excreted out. Okay, which will get excreted out, and so that less amount of furosemide will be available to produce its effect, because we know that only free fraction of the drug is active, and if the drug is bound to the albumin, that is its bound form is inactive. So in that case, this is the number one reason we have to increase the dose of furosemide. And also in case when there is renal failure, there is less or low GFR. If there is low GFR, less amount of furosemide, if there is less renal blood flow, there will be less amount of furosemide that will be secreted into the proximal tubule. So due to these two mechanisms, we have to use high dose of furosemide to exert its diuretic effect in case of renal failure, especially in chronic renal failure. Okay. So how furosemide is effective in acute left heart failure? So I told you initially that furosemide increases the expression of cyclooxygenase enzyme, which is helpful in the synthesis of prostaglandin, and that prostaglandin PGE2 especially is a vasodilator. So before the onset of diuretic effect, even this vasodilatory effect will be seen, due to which there will be decrease in the preload. Why? Because the vasodilatation will be more in capacitance vessels, that is veins, due to which there will be pooling of the blood and there will be decreased preload, and this decreased preload is associated with decreased end diastolic volume, leading to decreased pulmonary congestion. And whenever there is decreased pulmonary congestion, there will be increased oxygenation, and there will be immediate relief of dyspnea before its diuretic action sets in. So after this diuretic action, you know that a diuretic causes increased excretion of urine, leading to decreased plasma volume or preload again. So again that will decrease the end diastolic volume. Then that will also cause improvement in left ventricular function. It is said that cardiac size is also decreased due to these agents. That will again increase the efficiency of the heart. Okay, so based on these two mechanisms, we can explain how furosemide is effective in the treatment of acute left ventricular failure. Now coming to the adverse effects and the drug interactions. So number one will be, as it is a high ceiling diuretic, it can cause volume depletion and dehydration. See, this furosemide can cause hypersensitivity because it is a sulfonamide derivative, so it can cause hypersensitivity reaction, which is not present in case of ethacrynic acid. So only indication of ethacrynic acid will be when there is any adverse hypersensitivity reaction to furosemide. There we can use ethacrynic acid. Again, it can cause hypokalemia and urinary alkalosis. Actually, any of the agents which is acting proximal to the site of action of aldosterone, which is blocking the transporters which are proximal to the site of action of aldosterone, will increase the action, which will increase the activity of aldosterone. If we draw this rough diagram of glomerulus, so this is, suppose this is loop of Henle. So any this here aldosterone will be acting. So any diuretic that is blocking the transporters anywhere in this proximal to the action of aldosterone will cause increased action of aldosterone. Actually, body will try to conserve the sodium, so the actions of aldosterone will increase. So what is the role of aldosterone? It causes sodium retention at the expense of potassium and hydrogen excretion. So due to this increased activity of aldosterone, there can be increased excretion of potassium, explaining this hypokalemia, and increased excretion of hydrogen ions, explaining alkalosis. Okay, and again I have told you it will decrease the paracellular transport of calcium or reabsorption of calcium, and that can lead to hypocalcemia. So in a post menopausal woman, we should not be, or we should be using this diuretic very carefully, loop diuretics very carefully, as it can lead to hypocalcemia and development of osteoporosis there. And loop diuretics are also associated with impaired glucose tolerance test that can cause hyperglycemia. And I have told you again, along with the calcium, magnesium will be lost, so hypomagnesemia. And hypomagnesemia is a risk factor for again cardiac arrhythmias, so you have to look out for that. And as we know that this for the secretion of loop diuretics into the PCT, there is use of transporter, that is organic anionic transporter, which is also involved in the secretion of weakly acidic substances or acidic substances like uric acid. So uric acid excretion is secretion also involves this transporter. So there will be competition between loop diuretics and uric acid for their secretion. So in presence of loop diuretics, uric acid will not be able to get secreted into the PCT and will not be able to get excreted out. So there can be chances of hyperuricemia, especially if we are giving loop diuretics for a longer duration. So chronic administration of loop diuretics is associated with hyperuricemia, while while if we use loop diuretics acutely, there can be hypouricemia. So it can have opposite effect. So remember, hyperuricemia is only seen when we use loop diuretics for a longer duration, for chronic use, and this is not seen with ethacrynic acid. Okay. Now, ototoxicity can be an adverse effect of loop diuretics, and it is more of irreversible in nature in case of ethacrynic acid. So that's why we are not using ethacrynic acid nowadays, because it is associated with irreversible damage to the ears. So we are preferring furosemide. So ototoxicity is more in ethacrynic acid. So there are certain drug interactions that we have to know, that is seen with loop diuretics. So number one is with aminoglycoside antibiotics such as streptomycin. It can cause increased ototoxicity. Okay, it can synergize the ototoxic effects, because aminoglycoside also has some ototoxic effects. So if we give aminoglycoside and loop diuretics together, there is increased chance of ototoxicity. And I have told you when we were discussing lithium, when we were discussing this bipolar disorders, there we studied about how lithium and this loop diuretics are associated with their decreased clearance of lithium. Actually, we will see again this in when we will discussing thiazide group of diuretics, and again I will explain there. But for now, just remember that loop diuretics will decrease the clearance of lithium. So again, that can lead to increased toxicity of lithium. And lastly, as it is causing hypokalemia, as lithium, so as this loop diuretics is causing hypokalemia, and hypokalemia is associated with increased digoxin toxicity. Okay, digoxin will be able to bind to its sodium potassium ATPase more avidly when potassium levels are low, because potassium competes with the digoxin at its binding site. So this is important. In case of hyperkalemia, digoxin effect decreases. In case of hypokalemia, digoxin effect increases. So that can precipitate digoxin toxicity. So one term is there, diuretic resistance, that I have to, I mean, we can discuss something about diuretic resistance. What is it? It is actually failure to achieve any therapeutically desired reduction in edema. So any therapeutic effect, we are not able to produce that therapeutic effect despite we are giving maximum dose of that particular diuretic. So more commonly it is seen in loop diuretics, and there are different mechanisms involved in causing diuretic resistance. Number one is there is rebound sodium retention. Whenever we are giving diuretics, especially loop diuretics, they are high serum diuretics, so that will cause nephrons to cause increased reabsorption of sodium at proximal site or at distal sites away from the site of action of the loop diuretic. So there will be increased reabsorption of sodium. So this is body's compensatory mechanism. And also when this one term is there, post diuretic effect, it is said that when the levels of loop diuretics falls, whenever the levels of loop diuretics falls, that will again cause increased reabsorption, that is related to first only, that will cause increased reabsorption of sodium. How? By causing increase number of transporters. Body will try to increase the transporters that are present in nephron, and also there will be renal cell hypertrophy. There will be hypertrophy of PCT, so due to which there will be increased reabsorption of sodium. So this is post diuretic effect. And lastly we have diuretic braking. This is also one mechanism which combines the mechanism of 1 and 2, that will result in diuretic resistance. So how we will manage this case? We have to go for first dietary salt restriction, that is important. We have to restrict the salt intake, and we have to use loop diuretics more frequently. So you have to increase the dosing, you have to decrease the dosing interval, you have to give it more frequently, or you can use another agent along with loop diuretic, that is thiazide group of diuretic, that will have synergism in causing diuretic effect. Okay, they will cause sequential blockage of the transporters involved in sodium and water retention. So this is the management of diuretic resistance. So this is all about the loop diuretics. In next section we will discuss about thiazide group of diuretics. Thank you.